everybody. So today we're excited to share our data analysis of the bank data set. And today our group presenting includes Aaron, Dami, and myself. So we'll go ahead and get started here. And then moving on to the next slide. For our agenda here, we're going to be going over the introduction, followed by the explanatory data analysis, and then the creation of our interpretive models and predictive models. And then we'll go ahead and conclude with a summary of our findings. And then we'll go ahead and move on to our introduction. So for our introduction here, the bank data set is from a Portuguese bank, and it encompasses data from 41,088 clients. It has 19 explanatory variables, including 9 numerical and 10 categorical variables, the latter of which notably classifies the unknown response distinctly. And then central to this data set is the pivotal Y variable indicating whether a client has subscribed to a term deposit, a key interest for the bank to assess the impact of their marketing campaigns. And so in order to facilitate the robust analysis and model validation, the data set has been randomly divided into a training set of 32,950 entries, followed on by a test set of 8,238 entries. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here, one variable we wanted to point out is the duration variable. So this attribute highly affects the output of our target. So duration is the last contact duration in seconds, which is a numeric variable, and then where we have decided to go ahead and remove the variable from our analysis. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so we'll go ahead and start our EDA analysis here, and then we'll start with this next slide. And so the subset of the data set columns that were presented here include variables like default and loan that are categorical and part of the bank data set. And then we're looking at the variables of month and day of the week. They are related with the last contact of the current campaign. And then looking at campaign, P days, and previous, these are other attributes for campaign or past campaigns. And then lastly, looking at the employee variation rate, the year-over 3-month rate, and number of employees. These are more like social and economic context attributes. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So here we're looking at the summary statistic and numeric table. The boxes highlighted here are showing anomalies or significant figures. So, for example, here we've highlighted P days for the first quartile. Kind of 75% of this data is about 999 overall. And so then we're indicating that the clients are not previously contacted. And similar for previous, it indicates that over 75% of the data is 0, indicating that there has been no prior contacts. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so on this slide, the table provides a categorical summary of the data set. And so highlighting the distribution across different variables. So for month, it's highlighted showing that only 10 months have indicating that 2 months are missing. So we have January and February missing or not called out in the data set. And then for the min size column, we noticed that credit default was significantly low compared to the rest of the variables. And then lastly, we can see that the loan and P outcome showed the highest max size. And we'll go ahead and move on to this next slide. So here we are looking at the age distribution based on the Y variable. So we can see there is similar distribution overall for both yes and no. However, there are far more no values than yes values. And we also noticed that people with the age over 60 seem to be more likely to have a term deposit. So the probability of yes seems to decrease than increase. And overall, it seems that this will not be a good variable for prediction. So we'll go ahead and move on to education. So here we're looking at the distribution of education. So this graph shows the similar proportions of yes and no across all education levels. And then this variable does not seem like it will be a useful prediction for analysis either. So here we are looking at month data. So we're looking at the distribution by month. So we found that month is related with the last contact of the current campaign. So we can see that some months have far more yes values than other months. And overall, it looks like month could be a useful prediction. Here, we're looking at the previous outcomes. So this slide provides an insight into the impact of past marketing campaigns on current term deposit subscriptions. So this suggests that individuals who previously signed up for a term deposit following a campaign are more likely to do so again. And so it indicates a significant relationship between the past positive responses and the current subscription likelihood. And so for the employment variation here, we are looking at the employment variable rate distribution based on the Y value. And so we can see here that when this value is higher, less people have a term deposit. And so for the socioeconomic correlation, we can see that the employment variation rate, number of employed, and Euribor 3-month rate are all highly correlated. The accompanied graphs display a distribution of responses across different levels for these socioeconomic indicators, with all showing kind of strong correlations with the target variable. And here we're looking at the number of employed by month. So we can see that it's highly correlated with the employed variation rate. And so an increase will cause a decrease in the yes. And it also seems to vary by month, though where some months don't have a very high number of employees values at all. And so this points to both of these variables being kind of useful and in the model and having possible variation interactions. And here we are looking at the number of employed by outcomes. So all P outcomes results show that the same behavior, an increase in the number of employed leads to a decrease in yes probabilities. So this decrease has the same rate roughly, but different starting points. So points to both variables being useful in the model, but maybe no interaction. Moving on to the next slide. And so here we're looking at the percentage of term deposits over time. So the data rows were in order that they were received. And so we wanted to see if the distribution of the data changed over time. And so for the term deposits, those became more common as time went on. And we also wanted to test data to have similar characters to the training data. So we used random 80-20 split. Then we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and pass it on to my team member, Aaron.
Thank you. So we also looked at a clustering analysis for the numeric variables to see if they could be grouped together in useful ways for prediction. So looking at the silhouette statistic versus the number of clusters, we could see that the value is highest for a cluster size of 2, but also that when we go from 10 to 11 clusters, the value increases. So we thought that looking at cluster size of 2 and 11 would be useful. So looking at the heat map for 2 clusters, we can see that there's one giant cluster and with most of the data and one tiny cluster. So this wasn't very useful. For the 11 clusters, the sizes in the clusters was a lot more variable. So this was a little bit better. And looking at the yes-no distribution, we can see that there isn't much indicator that some clusters have a lot of more yeses or nos, but we wanted to plot to make sure. And looking at the plot, we can see that, especially looking at the cluster, the 11 cluster distribution, that there are some clusters with significantly more yeses, and then others with significantly more nos. But it's not an even split. So it points to that numeric variables can be used a little bit for for classification, for clustering, but not with 100% accuracy. Also, we looked at PCA analysis. This also was done with the numeric variables. We looked at the different principal components and saw that the first five had 90% of the variability. So those were the ones that we looked at. And particularly with looking at the first one, which had the highest correlation with the yes variable, we can see that there is some separation between the yeses and the nos, but the separation isn't 100%. So similar conclusion to the looking at the different clusters in the heat maps is that there can be some separation with numeric variables, but it's not 100%. Next, we looked at objective one, which was a interpretive logistic model. In order to create the model, we used forward and backward selection. So the metric we used was the AUC metric, area under the ROC curve. We calculated the average value for 10 folds for cross-validation. And the variable, we got 6 variables out of this. And as a note, one of the variables was removed, and that was the number of employed. And it was likely removed due to its high correlation with the other socioeconomic variables already in the model, chosen for the model as well. But then when we looked at the VIF scores for that, we saw there was still high correlation between particularly employee variation rate and the Euribor metric. So we decided to remove the Euribor metric, and that greatly reduced the VIF scores, but it still had a reasonable out-of-sample AUC. And then looking at that slightly reduced model with 5 variables, all the p-values were significant and all the VIF scores were low, and so we decided to proceed with this model. The 5 variables chosen were month, p-outcome, employee variation rate, contact, and consumer price index. We are putting the coefficients for the model. We took the exponent of those to get it to the odds ratio coefficient, and we included the 95% confidence intervals as well, and the list of p-values. But we wanted to interpret some of those coefficients. So for a categorical variable, we looked at month, in comparing March versus April. The odds of convincing the clients to subscribe to a term deposit in the month of April decreases by a factor of 0.25 compared to the month of March, keeping all the variables constant, and the 95% confidence interval for this decrease is 0.2 to 0.32. And we're looking at a numeric variable, the employee variation rate. For every 1 unit increase in the employment variation rate, the odds of convincing the customer to subscribe to a term deposit decrease by a factor of 0.44. All their variables are remaining constant. The 95% confidence interval for that decrease is 0.42 to 0.46. And evaluating the models against each other, we used several metrics: sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, as well as the AUC score. And for our data set, the yes was far more important than the no, because the yes means that someone is subscribing to a term deposit, which gives the bank money. So that was what we wanted to focus on. And particularly that focuses on the sensitivity and the PPV. So sensitivity being that given that a value is actually yes, that the model predicts it yes, and PPV given that the model predicts it is yes, that it is actually truly yes. And a good way to combine those two metrics is the F1 score, which the formula is given below. And similar to both sensitivity and PPV, it's a value that ranges from 0 to 1 being the best value. In addition, to actually hit the sensitivity and specificity in all those metrics, you need to select the threshold value. The default value is normally 0.5. However, we wanted to choose a value that would maximize the F1 score. And you can see that for us, for the logistic model, that was 0.77 on the training data. And in general, when you increase the value of the threshold, this decreases the sensitivity and increases the PPV. This is because that you're making it more selective in which yeses it chooses. So it's more likely that the yeses will be correct, but also you will be choosing less yeses. So you'll choose less overall. Oh, well. So when looking at the confusion matrix for the training data, first the AUC was 0.7868. The highest F1 score that we got from the graph on the previous slide was 0.4798. And then the confusion matrix shows the sensitivity, specificity, PPV, and NPV as well. So our next objective was looking at more complicated models that we use for prediction. So first we looked at a complex logistic regression model that concluded other terms possibly. And so looked at polynomial terms to see if that would be useful. Okay, so plotting for example, we use number employed. If you plot the normal variable by itself versus the variable to the 10th power, the lowest curve for both, you can see that the lowest curve for the 10th power is a little bit, they're pretty similar, but it's a little bit flatter near the end and just a little bit less variability. And so because of this, with similar results for other variables, we decided to proceed with using polynomials in the model selection, and also looked at interaction terms. So in the previous EDA slides, we looked at interactions with number employed, with month and P outcome, and those seemed promising. And another interaction term that also seemed promising was campaign with P outcome. So if you look at the loss curve for P outcome or for campaign by itself, it isn't very predictive. When you increase campaign, it lowers the number of yeses, but then increases later. And however, if you look at this when compared with different P outcome values, you can see that 2 out of the 3 values, they are monotonically decreasing. So when you increase campaign, they decrease the number of yeses. So all this points to interaction terms also being useful. So we decided to use both in the model creation. So for the complex logistic model, we used a similar approach, forward and backward selection, tried to maximize mean AUC for the cross-validated data sets. And the final model that we chose was pretty complicated in several polynomial terms, several interaction terms, and one single variable term in it. Looking at the metrics of this model on the training data, the AUC improved slightly to above 0.8. The highest F1 score improved a little bit as well to 0.5, a little bit 0.5. And across the board with the different metrics of sensitivity, specificity, PPV, and NPV, those all increased slightly for the training data, and we will show the result of the testing data later on. So now I'll pass off to Dami, who will talk about other more complex models that we investigated.
Thank you, Aaron. Hi, for our next step, we try looking at the metrics for our LDA, QDA, and other non-parametric models. For our LDA model, we got the AUC for our training data to be about 5.6%. We got the threshold for our highest F1 to be about 23.06%. Our highest F1 score was 45.6%. And now we only use numeric variables from our simple logistic model for the LDA model. Next, we looked at the QDA model. We got the AUC for our training data to be about 76.9%. The threshold for our highest F1 score to be about 12.6%. Our highest F1 score was 46.81%. Like the prior LDA model, we also use only the numeric variables from our simple logistic model for the data. For our non-parametric model, we use the random forest model, which is basically a collection of decision trees where the decision tree split up the explanatory variables into partitions. It's a really good non-parametric model for classification. For our alpha parameters, we use the M tree, which was the amount of variables randomly selected each split. And we use the entry, which is the amount of decision trees in the model. So random forests are generated differently each time. So we use a set seed to make sure the result for our runs is constant. The random forest model, we try looking at two different packages, the caret package and the random forest package. So the caret package iterates through various M-tree and N-tree values and finds the optimum one for the model. So using the caret package, we got our AEC for training data to be about 66.9%. We got the threshold for the ISF1 score to be about 4%, which was really low, most likely due to the high complexity from the random forest. We got the highest of score to be about 45.9%. For the logistic model equation, we use the simple logistic model equation for that. From the plot above, we can see that the three most important variables were the P outcome, the employment variation rate, and constant price index. Next, we looked at the random forest package, where we selected our hyperparameters. For the entry, we chose 3, and the MTRY, we chose about 5,000 iterations. We also used the simple logistic equation for our model. We got a threshold for the ISF1 score to be about 3.4%. The ISF1 score was about 46.05%. The AEC for our training data was about 67.03%, which was about 0.3% higher than our current package. So we decided to use this random forest package for our random forest model. You also see, similar to the contribution plot for the current package, we got our three most important variables for our accuracy and impurity to be P outcome, the employment variation rate, and a constant price index. Next, another non-parametric model we looked at was the support vector machines, which is really good for both regression and classification. It basically just creates a boundary line plane or hyperplane for the best fits to classify the data points. The hyperparameters for the model creation were the kernel, which defines the type of curve, the gamma, which affects the fluctuation, and the cos, which affects the bias variance trade-offs. So for our support vector machine model, we used variables from the complex logistic model for our data. We chose our cos to be 10, which provides less variance to the model. We chose our gamma to be 1, which provides more fluctuations to the model. Our thresholds were really low, about 8% to 10%. Our F1 score was about 65%. AUC was 85.1%, which were the highest values we've seen on training data. The sensitivity of our model was about 61.6%, which is smaller than the PPV of 69.0%, which is strange though, because across our previous models, like the simple logistic model and the complex logistic model, we see a growing trend of the sensitivity being greater than the PPV. Next, here are the ROC curves for our model. We can see that the one that stands out the most are the ROC curves for the random forest model and the support vector machines. This is most likely because this makes the model feel more confident on its predictions. Next, here's a table showing the metrics of all the models we've tried so far, like the simple logistic model, complex logistic regression model, the LDA, QDA, random forest, and the support vector machines. I won't take much time on this, but looking at the table, we can see that the complex logistic regression model has the maximum value of most of the metrics, like the area under the curve, the F1 score, and the MPV and the sensitivity, while the random forest model and the support vector machines have the lowest values of the metrics. Next, we'll be concluding our results. Based on the model comparisons, you can see that the complex logistic regression has the highest sensitivity, MPV, F1 score, and area under the curve. We noticed that the logistic models are easier to work with. The random forest model also has the lowest sensitivity, but it has the highest specificity. So we can see a trade-off between both metrics. The LDA has the worst sensitivity than the simple logistic model. The support vector machine has its worst specificity, PPV, F1 score, and worst drop-off between training and test results, most likely due to overfitting. Non-parametric models took the longest to train. Basically, we see that no models really did well because most of them had a PPV of less than about 50%. Sensitivity was always much less than the specificity, most likely due to the highest node count across all models. Next, we tried training on older data and testing on the newer data. We did a random 80-20 split. We found out that the training for the F1 score was worse. It's about 25%, which was 50% lower than the previous one of like about 49%. We also needed to filter the test data and simplify complex model due to the missing values that were present in our training data. Also, we realized that testing sensitivity, PPV, and F1 was better, but specificity, MPV, and area under the curve was much worse in this model validation. Also, realized that simple logistic model performed better than the complex logistic model. So based on our analysis, we highly suggest for the next campaign that the campaign team should focus more on the month of March, but they could also look into the months of August and December, which aren't bad either. We also suggest that people are more likely to say yes if they previously subscribed to the previous term deposit. Also, it will be more beneficial to call more when the socioeconomic variables are low. So, yeah, what we plan on doing in the future, given enough time and computational resources. We plan on interpreting analysis with duration variable. We plan on oversampling the year's data to improve sensitivity and see how that improves the model metrics. We plan on selecting our variables to be tailored towards the random forest to see if that's going to improve our AERC score. We plan on revisiting the support vector machine in order to reduce out of sample error. And we plan on assembling the model and see how it improves our model. So thank you for your time. LinkedIn are attached to the page. Please feel free to connect to ask more questions and reach out. We appreciate the time you took to listen to our presentation, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.